Hello everyone, welcome to this e-lesson titled the Multimedia Instructional Development Models and Processes as part of the EIST6130 Instructional Multimedia Development course. So here's the objective. We're going to describe models and processes used to design and develop digital media. So there are a number of design and development instructional design models. So again, when we say instructional design, creating instructional material, it may or may not be multimedia based. But then any of the models or processes that you use to create instructional material can also be used for creating multimedia. So I'm going to start with ADDIE. ADDIE is one that you all are probably already familiar with, right? ADDIE is it's described more as a process including analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. Some visuals include evaluation along with the four in a linear manner. Some included at the center. Actually, evaluation should occur at every phase, right? Not necessarily only at the end. So it should occur at every phase. So I have a slide for each of the ADDIE phases. So and you start with an analysis, right, which is the first phase. So you want to know who your learners are or who your audience is before you start creating multimedia. You want to know who you're creating it for, and then based on that, you do a learner analysis, and then based on that, you create it for them. Also, you want to know what is the goal or the intended outcome. What do you want to teach them? So doing a goal analysis is very important. So you do a number of analysis, as part of the analysis phase. We'll just talk a lot about analysis in the next module. So this module focuses more on the models, but then the next module, we will talk specifically on analysis. So in the design phase, usually you focus on the content, right? The subject matter of the content. And then you also talk about, you work on the writing objectives or the assessment items. So all that happens as part of the design. And media selection also happens as part of the design. So, you want to do your analysis and then before you go into development, you finalize what is the appropriate media to teach this particular instructional content. E-learning may or may not be the solution, at all situations. So you want to figure out that you use the right media to teach the right instructional material. So that this is what happens in design. And then comes development. So development is where you are generating the instructional materials. If you're creating multimedia products, so this happens right here. And then you create all the media and the materials for the instruction, any supporting documents that goes with it, everything happens in development. So end of this phase, you will have a course or a workshop. In this case, a multimedia based course or a workshop ready for delivery. And then comes implementation, where you are ready to deliver the instruction to the learners, and you want to make sure that everything is effective and efficient, and then in the end it promotes student understanding of materials and objectives and thus transfer of knowledge. So this happens in implementation. And then evaluation kind of occurs ongoing. So, in the first visual I showed you, evaluation was at the center, even though on this visual it's kind of like in the linear process. A lot of times, it is thought to be linear, but I think evaluation should happen at every stage. So formative evaluation should be ongoing. So, you collect feedback at every stage and making sure that, the instruction is effective. Summative is to judge the mastery of the learning or the quality of the material towards the very end, whether this training should continue, so that would be summative. So, but formative is more ongoing, collecting feedback periodically to make improvements to the instructional material. So that's a quick look at ADDIE, and here is a visual I thought kind of synthesizes it very well. So there's the analysis. So sample tasks could include needs assessment, problem identification, task analysis. Design is, we talked about writing objectives, developing test items, planning, instruction, identifying resources. Development is working with users, developing workbook, flowchart programs. Implementation is trying it out, right? Or the training, the instructor training you might be doing. And evaluation is, you're recording time data, how long it's taking, interpreting test results, you're surveying the, the learners, and then you're revising activities. So those are all some sample tasks. You can also look at sample outputs. So at every phase, there are some outputs that could be created. For analysis, you could have learner profiles, so you need to know your learners, right? And then design, there's objectives, strategies, prototype specification, development, there's storyboards, scripts, exercises, CAIs, and then implementation, again, you're collecting student comments and data, and then evaluation, there's recommendations, project report, and device prototype. So that was ADDIE, and then Dick and Carry is another. It's been used quite a bit in designing instruction. A lot more linear. I want to say it's a little more detailed than ADDIE. It still uses the ADDIE phases. So, for example, if you look, we started assessing needs to identify goals, right? So that's kind of like a goal analysis, and there's instructional analysis and learner and context analysis, so which you want to do as part of your analysis, right? And then you're writing objectives and assessment, developing assessments. So right after analysis, you're doing those two, and then you do this, develop instructional strategies, and then you're developing and selecting instructional material, and then there's formative and summative evaluation, and then there is revised instruction that's occurring throughout, at every step. So again, as you see, ADDIE is kinda inbuilt in here, but this is a little bit more called out, right? So that's the Dick and Carry model. So the multimedia development actually will happen at the develop and select instructional materials in that particular phase. Here's Hannafin and Peck model. It's a very high level, right? Very high level. Again, you see needs assessment. Phase 1, phase 2 is design, phase 3 is development, implement, and then evaluation and revision is ongoing. So you can see the common pattern, right? There is analysis, there is design, there is development, there's implementation, and there is evaluation. Nurk and Gustafson, this has got a little bit more detail, but they have three main phases: problem determination, design, and development. So problem determination is almost like analysis. So you're identifying problems, learners' entry-level skills, instructional goals, and then you're organizing them. So design, you're developing objectives, specifying strategies, and specifying media. Then in design, and in development, you're selecting development materials, you're revising materials, analyzing results, and then you're implementing it. So implementation is also included as part of the development phase. So Nurk and Gustafson. This is one of my favorites, the Morrison-Ross-Kemp, and you might have looked at several of these models in the instructional design course. So in Morrison-Ross-Kemp, again, we start with the instructional problems, right at the top here, and then so part of the analysis, right? Instructional problems, learner characteristics, task analysis. Those three, and then comes instructional objectives. You write your objectives, you sequence the content, instructional strategies, you design the message, and then comes the instructional delivery, and then you have the evaluation instruments. And then you have summative and formative evaluation called out, and there is project management called out, and there's planning and revision and support services. So I think this is a little bit more detailed. But again, it has the similar steps as some of the other models discussed. Rapid prototyping. So this was proposed by Tripp and Backelmeyer. And again, the models we looked at so far were more linear, right? It was started with analysis and then design and development. Again, here it is similar, but I think this is a little bit more non-linear. So it's more rapid. So if you see analysis, you're writing objectives, and then prototyping and utilizing the prototype, it all happens at the same time. You see that? So, and then the install and maintain system. So it's a more rapid kind of a rapid non-linear kind of a process in this particular model. So this model, your spiral model, actually is used more in the software development. Again, multimedia development can be considered like a software development, right? So some of these terminology comes from software development. So you see the four main steps are: determine objectives, identify and resolve risk, development and test, and plan the next iteration. So if you see, it goes in a spiral, right? So there is the concept of requirements, concept of operation, requirements plan, and prototype one. And then you finish that, verification and validation, development plan, and then comes the second one. And then the test plan, the third one. So it goes in a spiral format, and so that is why it is called as a spiral model. So every phase is incremental, in terms of the prototype that is being developed, and you end with the operational prototype. This is also, Scrum framework is also used in the software industry. It's good for you to be familiar with these terms. Again, you start with the user stories. So user stories are like, the uh, like result of analysis of what expectations, what do you want to be built, and then comes planning, and then implementation, and then daily scrum. So you decide, okay, this day I'm going to build so much, right? And then a sprint review meeting, what got built, and then there's a retrospective, you reflect on it, and then again you go back and see, okay, what can we build next? So it's a very agile methodology where you're building in small increments, and these are all the people who are involved in the the Scrum project, and so it's very agile. So again, this could also be used for multimedia development. um, Waterfall model also comes to us from the software world. This is a more linear, a sequential linear. Like you start with requirements, clear requirements. What do you need to be built, and then design, implementation, verification, and maintenance. That's called. It's like because it's linear and in steps, one below the other. It's called as the waterfall model. The 5E model, it's more like an learner experience focused. You start with engage. How are the learners engaged? How can you engage the learners? Then you get them to explore, and then explain, take them to the next level, and then elaborate, and then finally there is evaluate. So that's called as the 5E model. So these are, I'm just introducing you to a variety of models. So you can see when you develop multimedia, any of these can be used, right? Again, as you see, all of them has a planning or an analysis phase, and there is a design, and there is the development, and then implementation and evaluation. But again, whether it's linear or non-linear, and how much time you have, a lot of other factors come into play as well. Like how quickly are you developing a prototype, how quickly are you getting feedback, all that will come into play when you're developing multimedia. So this is actually, I wanted to show you one research study which came up with a process, a multimedia development process as explained by practitioners. This is actually an old study. It's from 98, so which means it's like a decade to 2 decades old. But I thought it was still very interesting what they did in this, and I think several of the findings are still applicable. They interviewed 16 developers from 10 multimedia companies, and the developers came from various backgrounds such as audio, video production, film, television, computer science, art, graphic design, history, physics, and instructional technology. And this study was conducted by Liu et al., and it was published in the Journal of Research on Computing and Education. And I've included it as a reading, so you can read it in detail. So it has 6 phases: funding, planning, designing, producing, testing, and marketing. Okay, so this is what they said that they do when they develop multimedia, all the way from funding to marketing. So if you look at this visual, so under funding, so it starts with, even before planning, there is funding, right? When you're working, when there is cost involved, then, funding is critical, right? So they talked about some of the things that they do for funding is writing proposals, or responding to RFPs, or writing grants, obtaining contracts. So all that happens in funding. So planning is more like, part of the analysis too, right? Negotiating with the client on scheduling, budget, and scope, finding out what the client wants, brainstorming, deciding on the objectives, presentation styles, and delivery platform, creating a prototype, and getting feedback from the client. So that is what they said falls under planning. And designing is, again, creating documents, specifying the design, content, function, and interface. You're doing flowcharts and storyboards, and then creating timelines and identifying major milestones, and then also distributing work among the team members. So all that happens in designing. So production is where the development happens. So the programming happens, you're writing scripts, creating artwork, creating animation, video, and audio, creating interface, and you're putting it all together, right? So that is production. So testing is getting feedback internally. So almost like evaluating too, right? Getting feedback internally, but also getting feedback from the client, getting feedback from the users, and then you revise and debug. And finally is the marketing, which is marketing the product and distributing the products. So that is marketing. So again, if you see, some of the terminology is different, but then what they do under each of these phases looks similar to like an instructional design process. But again, you also want to keep in mind, so we are focusing specifically on multimedia development. So, so there is interface design, there is artwork, there is animation. So, so in development, there's a lot more that is going on rather than just creating like maybe a text print-based instructional material maybe. So, that's what I wanted to show you as the major phases of multimedia development. So some of the folks that they mentioned in this article, who are involved in multimedia development, I think the first five were called out. Project manager, definitely someone who sees through the project, instructional designer. A lot of times even IDs act as project managers. There's a programmer, videographer, audiographer, and then there's also animators, writers, editors. So it's a huge team, of folks involved in developing multimedia. But one thing, few years ago, multimedia development was time consuming. Like, we were using products like Adobe Flash, so authorware, director, those all were like more like time consuming, not as rapid development. But think about like, Articulate or Captivate. I think, the designer, the instructional designer can be the programmer also these days. So sometimes, the instructional designers are expected to wear multiple hats in the current situation. So it depends on how large the project is, the scope is, and how large your team is, whether you're able to bring in additional talent, for writing, for doing videos, for doing audio. So all that matters. So this was actually interesting. I thought I'll share this as well. So when you work on multimedia projects, it's not that you have to always create new elements. You can also gather or digitize existing elements. So you can look for like text, graphics, audio clips, video clips, existing one, and then you create some new elements too, right? Instructional text, or you're shooting or scanning photographs, creating graphics, and then you're recording audio, narration, music, sound effects, or video, and then you put them all together, import all of it into the authoring tool. One thing to pay attention to is, especially when you work with a client, most of the clients have a style guide. So you want to use their color palettes, right? And then you create the interface based on the color palettes, and then you build in all the navigation and interaction and the instruction in together, and then you bring it together. So that's something I also wanted to share. So we quickly talked about a number of models and processes used to design and develop digital media. And I hope as you all work towards your multimedia projects, this will give you an idea on the steps to follow.